This year, comparing LG and Samsung's flagships is not a simple task. In part, that's because LG's flagship seems to change every other week, and Samsung's comes in 2 sizes now. So in this video, we're going to focus on the Galaxy S9 Plus and the LG G7 ThinQ, since they're the most prominent devices in both lineups. They're 2 phones with vastly different priorities, strengths, and weaknesses, and it's time to put them head to head. I'm Alex with Android Central, and this is the LG G7 ThinQ versus the Samsung Galaxy S9 Plus. The first surprising thing is that in terms of size, the G7 is actually closer to the S9 Plus than the regular S9. The footprint isn't far off, and neither is the screen size, though that's skewed by the differing aspect ratios. LG goes with a flat 6.1-inch 19.5x9 panel with a notch, whereas Samsung's curved 6.2-inch Super AMOLED is 18.5x9. This year, LG is talking up its super bright LCD, which can run up to 1000 nits in its boosted brightness mode. And while this is a great display, I have to give the win to Samsung here, as the S9 Plus still boasts the best colours and best daylight visibility of any Android phone. I don't particularly mind LG's display notch, but there's no denying that the front face of the G7 is just oddly asymmetrical in all directions, whereas things are much more balanced on the S9 Plus. And that's pretty representative of my feelings overall on both of these 2 designs. The G7 looks fine, it's a perfectly attractive phone, and the red and blue colours in particular are really eye-catching, but the more organic curves of the Galaxy S9 Plus give it that little aesthetic edge. One benefit of the G7's narrower body is that most of the time it's easier to use in one hand than Samsung's flagship. But surprisingly, when it comes to gestures like swipe down for the notification shade, Samsung has a few helpful software tricks that LG lacks. You can swipe down on the fingerprint scanner or on a blank area of your home screen to see notifications and quick settings, and Samsung also has a better one-handed mode. LG's mini view gesture is finicky and doesn't work particularly well. Samsung's also stepped up its built-in audio capabilities a lot in the S9 Plus, with dual speakers that put out a decent amount of volume and bass, but that's nothing compared to what LG's packed into the G7. Alongside the quad DAC to make wired audio really sing, the new boombox speaker gives the loudest and clearest sound I've ever heard come out of a smartphone. It's not to say Samsung's effort is bad, just that LG is so far ahead of everyone in this area. In the US, both phones use a Qualcomm Snapdragon 845 processor, and the rest of the spec sheet is similarly matched. The biggest differences are RAM. Samsung boasts a roomier 6GB in the S9 Plus versus the LG G7's 4. And the S9 Plus also packs in a significantly larger battery capacity of 3500 mAh. Overall performance is kind of a wash, there's nothing in it between these 2. LG has a slight disadvantage in terms of RAM, which means if you go looking for it, yes, you can absolutely see the G7 bumping apps out of memory more quickly than the S9 Plus. But will you notice it if you don't have both phones side by side to compare? Probably not. At the same time, the battery life difference also isn't as great as the numbers would suggest. I've used both as my daily driver, and in my experience, Samsung doesn't get that much extra out of the almost 20% larger cell in the S9 Plus. Both phones will get you a full day, but not more. Both average around 4 to 4.5 hours of screen on time. In some cases with heavier use, I've actually seen the G7 pull ahead slightly. Fair warning though, I have been using the international version of the S9 Plus, which has Samsung's own Exynos processor, and is known to have inferior battery life compared to the US version. At least both phones have wireless charging though for easier refills. However, Samsung is able to boast speedier wireless top-ups thanks to its fast wireless charging technology. On the software side, both phones run Android 8.0 Oreo with their own unique UI flavors. Samsung's is a bit more sci-fi looking than LG's, with more features than you'll ever need and tight integration into Samsung's ecosystem in other areas like SmartThings. Not long ago, LG's UI was kind of a mess, but I like the direction they're going with the G7 software. It's differentiated with a few design cues borrowed from Samsung, but overall it's a lot closer to vanilla Android than you might be expecting. Both sides have their own unique AI features. Samsung's Bixby is still here, along with a controversial Bixby button that thankfully you can now disable. Bixby is more useful than it's ever been, with app support improving all the time. Meanwhile, LG is all in on Google Assistant, with a dedicated assistant key located in a less annoying place on the left edge of the phone. There are some unique voice commands for LG phones like taking a selfie in the camera app, and you can easily get straight into Google Lens with a double tap. Samsung has most of these assistant features as well, of course, including Google Lens, just without the handy shortcut button. With the exception of the swipe-in gesture to get to Bixby Home, Samsung software has always been fast and smooth, and so far my S9 Plus hasn't succumbed to the bit rot that slowed down many older Samsung phones. LG has its own array of forgettable AI features in the home screen, And although I haven't been using it for as long as the S9 Plus, performance has also held up really well. Probably the biggest, clearest difference between these two phones is the camera setup. Both use dual rear cameras, but in radically different ways. Samsung has a superior 12 megapixel main camera with the option to go all the way down to f1.5 in low light scenes, plus larger pixels on the sensor itself. LG's 16 megapixel shooter is higher resolution, but that's really the only thing it has going for it in this comparison. Dynamic range is worse, fine detail is also a little mushy compared to the S9, plus low light photos, even in the new super bright mode, can't match up to the S9's higher resolution captures. The only thing the G7's camera is able to boast over the S9 is its second wide-angle shooter. Nobody does wide-angle photography on a phone like LG, and the G7's wide camera, though not quite as wide as the V30's, can capture dramatic shots that you simply can't replicate on the S9 or any other handset. In the grand scheme of things, the S9's telephoto lens is nothing to write home about. Quality is decent, but the phone quickly switches back to a digital crop of the main camera in low light. With LG, if you want to zoom in, it's digital zoom all the way. Samsung's fake depth of field portrait mode is also, on the whole, better than LG's, though you'll still deal with imperfections around the edge of objects that are common to all fake bokeh modes. Ultimately then, I think the Galaxy S9 Plus is the better phone for me, and I think most other people as well. Sure, it's a pretty boring upgrade from last year's S8 Plus, but the priorities in this phone are more in line with most of the phone buying public. Samsung gives you all the essentials along with a fantastic design and a really great camera setup. LG is playing to a more niche audience with the G7. Maybe consider this phone if you're a big fan of the wide-angle camera or if high-quality audio is a priority. For me though, the Galaxy S9 Plus is still the Android phone to beat in mid-2018. That's it for now. Be sure to subscribe for all the latest on the next wave of Android flagships. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.